Good morning, and welcome to part four of our Zen of Trauma series. Last time we talked about what happens when trauma strikes and we have our world disrupted, and we believe the world is unfair, unsafe, and unpredictable. The question arises then, as I talked about last time, we cope or we deal with the memories of that event. Now, as I said earlier, coping just gets us through the night. It's not satisfactory, I don't think, for most of us. We would like to recover. We would like to live normal lives, whatever that means for us. But it's very difficult, isn't it? I think that the practices involved in Zen Buddhism, can be very helpful. I don't just think it, I know it from experience, my own, as well as from many of my patients and students. There are several types of practices involved in Zen Buddhism. The primary one for Soto Zen is Zazen, or seated meditation. Now, well, let me just go through a few of them and then we'll go into detail with one or two. There's Zazen, seated meditation. There's mindfulness practice. There is Oryoki, which is eating meditation. There's Samu, which is work meditation. And there, of course, there's Dokusan with a teacher. That involves a private interview between the student and the teacher, or perhaps a therapist and a client. But that's really not a Zen purview. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind, that a Zen teacher or a Zen teacher is not a therapist. So you don't go to a Zen teacher for therapy, you go to a therapist for therapy. Zen teachers who fall into the trap of becoming therapists to their student make a big mistake, I think. They have to understand there are limits to their qualifications and to their abilities. It's like, I think it was Arnold Schwarzenegger said in one of his movies, a man's got to know his limitations. It's important to keep that in mind. So you go to a Zen teacher to learn about Zen and Zen practices. And Zen practices, their primary purpose, I think, in my experience anyway, has been to wake up. That is, to learn to be completely present in the moment as it is, not try to change that moment necessarily, but to reside in it, to abide in it. I often use an analogy of a duck floating on the water. The duck floats on the water. You've seen ducks floating on a pond, I'm sure. They just float. And once in a while they duck their heads underwater and snatch up some morsel or something. But anyway, they're floating like a duck on the water. And along comes a wind, and the wind makes the water choppy. And then maybe a storm comes, and there's thunder and lightning, and the water gets really choppy. And what's that duck doing? The duck, frankly, is simply floating. For the duck, there's no real storm. The duck and the water and the storm are essentially connected. They're one. So the duck just floats. Now, I think Zen practice enables us to learn how to do that. That is to say, when things get sticky or touchy or threatening or whatever, a Zen practitioner has the ability to float like that duck. Now, what's important about that is that the duck doesn't not react to the storm. The duck is floating. That's a choice that the duck makes, or we could say a choice that we make. We take the storm that's around us into us, and we reside in it. We don't fight with it. It's like Um, I, I grew up in Miami with hurricanes and all that sort of thing, and what I noticed was palm trees bend with the wind, and they rarely get pulled up by the roots. Oak trees, on the other hand, don't bend, and they get pulled up by the roots. So it's important to keep in mind that when the storm is coming, that we bend, that we don't fight with it. Now, it doesn't mean we accept it in the sense that it's okay to have a storm. It's not okay to have a storm, and some of the causes of the storm we should look at and attempt to remedy. That's what engaged practice is all about. But we do it with a calm, abiding mind, or we try to, we attempt to. And some of us are relatively good at that, and some of us are not so good at that. I'm one of the ones who's not so good at that sometimes. I will admit that. But the difference is, I think, that those of us who practice are aware of our shortcomings. We're aware of the fact that we're resisting the storm, and we make effort in that resistance to open our hand of thought, as one teacher used to say, and allow the storm to just be. And we go about doing remedial work. We attempt to resolve the conflict, but with a calm mind. Now, how do we do that? One way is through the practice of Zazen, which I mentioned before, seated meditation. And the practice is really simple, actually, but it's very difficult. What you do is you sit down on a chair or on a cushion, cross-legged if you're on a cushion. If you're in a chair, you sit with a triangle, so to speak. Your 2 feet are firmly planted on the floor. Your seat is firmly on the chair, probably the forward third edge of the chair. Your back is upright. Your shoulders are back. Your hands are placed in the cosmic mudra. There's the left hand cradled in right. And you should have your elbows out so that you can hold an egg in your armpit. That's posture. There are 3 aspects to this practice. The first is posture, which I just talked about. The second is breath. We breathe in through our nose and out through our nose, in through our nose and out through our nose. It's that simple. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Don't try to breathe slowly or deeply or anything like that. Just allow your breath to follow its own rhythm. As time passes on the cushion or in the chair, your breath will find its own pace, its own rhythm. The third aspect is much more difficult. That's the aspect of mind, which I talked about in terms of the duck floating on the water. What will happen often when we sit in practice is thoughts will come up, feelings will come up. Maybe we'll have an itch that we need to scratch, or a memory will pop into our head or something like that, or we'll see a pattern maybe on the wall through something our brain does. It's a pattern recognition sort of thing. What we do with that is simply let it go. We breathe in and breathe out. We notice a feeling, we let it go. Breathe in, breathe out. We notice a thought, we let it go. Breathe in, breathe out. My teachers talked about leaves flowing down a stream as thoughts. We can pick up the leaf out of the water and look at it and hold it and so forth. But what we ought to do is place it back in the stream and let it go, float on down the stream. So we practice these 3 things. We practice our posture, we practice our breath, and we practice with our mind. Now what happens, I think, as a result of that is that we learn that we do not have to react to everything. We do not have to do anything. We can simply sit. That should be a refreshing relief for many of us. We don't have to do anything. Somebody gives us a finger in traffic, we don't have to do anything. We simply breathe. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. So when a traumatic memory occurs, which they will occur, we notice it, we breathe in, we breathe out, we breathe in, we breathe out. We let the memory go. The thoughts and feelings rarely last for very long, especially for practicing this practice, placing our attention on our breath, We breathe in, breathe out, and so on. So we learn that we don't have to be reactive. We learn that we don't have to seek shelter necessarily. We don't have to act in a hypervigilant or exaggerated startle response way. We learn that we can simply be in that traumatic memory and not do anything with it particularly. It sort of takes the power out of it, and I think that that's important. Often, as I said earlier in one of my other talks, we often believe that the memory or that our thoughts are not just leading us, but carrying us along, as if we're somehow inextricably attached to them. We don't have to be. We can change that relationship, and this process of practicing Zazen enables us to do that. Now, in the next session, I know we don't want to go too much over 10 minutes. In the next session or series, I will talk about some of the other practices involved with the Zen of trauma. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, please email me, harveyhilbert@yahoo.com. Thank you very much, and have a good day. Be well.